How are you, Reza?
I'm good, Shay. How are you?
I am good today.
Yeah, so Shay, this is an exciting episode that we're going to do. It's slightly different than the ones that we've done before. But before we jump into the episode, first, we have to say hello, 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 which is
We
your
do.
typical introduction. So I'm going to do it on behalf of you. But welcome to our listeners, our frequent listeners, and then welcome to our new listeners. Let me just take a minute to share what Future Forward is about. It's a conversation that Shay and I've been having for many years, where we've been talking about sustainable cities and thriving communities. And we're bringing you into this conversation. We pick a topic each week and we provide some historical perspective on that topic. We then bring you into the present and then provide strategic foresight for the future. And all of this from a perspective of non-experts. We're not experts. All of this comes from a place of curiosity. And so we invite our listeners to share your opinions, ideas, expertise with us so that we can all learn together. And so this episode is slightly different, Shay. We're not sort of going to do our typical format of history, present, and strategic foresight. We're just going to jump to the future. So Shay, tell us what this one is about.
Yes. So thanks, Reza, and thanks for making sure we introduce ourselves like we typically do, even with the hellos.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. So today we'll be reviewing a few future technologies, advanced technologies that we've mentioned in the course of 20 plus episodes we've done here. And so we're calling this episode The Future of Advanced Technologies, but it really is a question, and we're framing it as, will it work? Will these technologies work? And before we dive into the technologies, I'll highlight that what we've done for this episode is a little bit of future casting, strategic foresight to say, look, here are some vectors of problems or areas of need in cities. What makes a city? What systems work in a city? And how can we project out into the future and scan the horizon of these particular vectors of need through the lens of technology, do some pattern recognition, and then just develop scenarios based on any patterns we've seen. We always talk about the historical past, and those things tend to continue into the future. But where has technology advanced, or where is it going based on where we think the future will be? And we develop some scenarios and play around with some ideas. So anyone can do future casting, and we've chosen to just do it for this episode to see what lies in our future, what possibilities exist there. So we can start with the first one.
Yeah, let's jump in.
Yeah, so the first technology we're going to look at for our future casting is adaptive infrastructure. And adaptive infrastructure is infrastructure that dynamically adjusts to environmental, social, technological changes, and it utilizes smart sensors and the buzzwordy artificial intelligence for real-time responses to address whatever needs show up as a result of these changes in the systemic environment around it. It adheres to some laws. We picked two that matter or are related to this idea of adaptive infrastructure. And the first one is that urban metabolism requires circular thinking. And the idea here being that adaptive infrastructure integrates circular economy principles by optimizing things like energy usage. How does a building adjust the space it utilizes or the energy it utilizes depending on the number of people in the space, for example? How does it adapt to manage a resource utilization? And this can be in the form of the building itself, modifying like some modular buildings, or the flexibility of the utility usage in the space. So that's the first law it adheres to. The second one is that climate resilience is an urban imperative, being that adaptation mechanisms, which is what adaptive infrastructure is, adaptation mechanisms mitigate risks from climate-related events like flooding or heat waves. And the follow-on idea here being, how do streets, for example, adapt when there's a flooding incident or heat waves in the city? With every one of our rules or laws, we always, and I love that you always make sure we do this, Reza, we always consider the community elements. How does it impact the community? And before we can implement adaptive infrastructure, we have to cater to the needs of the communities. So participatory governance, we have to listen to their voices essentially. So participatory governance to prioritize the solutions that are tailored to local needs is very crucial here. And as you can imagine, with any new technology or any new approaches, there will be challenges. And the law that this technological advancement flouts, which is a challenge for the implementation, is that it conflicts with urban scaling predicting city performance. So if you need more homes in a city, you need more homes in the city. No matter how you chop and change and make your infrastructure adaptive to cater to people, there are some constraints as the city scales that we have to balance there, despite the fact that we make our infrastructure more adaptive.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one, Shay. And the thread that I want to pull over here is that we kind of have a form of adaptive infrastructure when you think about utilities and electricity with peaker power plants
Yes.
that are, small gas turbines ready for when you hit a peak, or storage batteries that can store energy from renewable sources when that energy is not needed to distribute it at the time of need. But I think the big challenge with this technology is not the technology itself, but the systems and decisions and policies to implement the technology. Because our utilities and regulatory authorities and cities and municipalities don't think about infrastructure planning in terms of adaptability of an adaptable system. They think about it in very long range, very broad brush, absolute, ensuring that everything works for every scenario. But adaptability doesn't seem to be part of the mindset of planning infrastructure. I mean, what do you think, Shay?
No, I think you raise a really good point. It's even though adaptive infrastructure will be costly initially, there will be complexities with implementation. I 100% agree with you that the real issue will be the mindset shift that is required to get this into our daily lives for the use and the just support and help it will provide to residents of a city. So you're right. It's this one. While I like the idea, I think there's a lot more work in changing minds before we can get there. To get it to any place even remotely close to being useful for people. So that is so true. We should move to the second one, and Reza, you'll take this one.
Yeah. So the next one is mobile trash disintegration station. So we're sort of narrowing our focus to a targeted use case. So in this case, it'd be portable units that uses advanced thermal, chemical, or biological processes to disintegrate waste on site to reduce landfill use. Landfills take up big areas, cause environmental problems. This could be a solution to addressing that. And the laws that it supports is urban metabolism requires circular thinking. This system aligns with that optimization of resource and waste flows, as in, you're tackling the waste disposal where the waste is generated, in a smaller loop in our tighter system. And so it's a good way of thinking about sort of solving this problem. And then the other one is urban greening enhances resilience, so reducing waste impacts environmental quality and biodiversity. And so this could be a good solution to help with that particular law. The key community element in this one is ensuring that the public is educated on this, and all parts of, all economic strata in a city needs to understand this. There could be NIMBYism over here. Landfills typically end up in areas where economically disadvantaged people are. And so will these, sort of collect trash and take them to areas where they need to, so there could be some issues with that, and ensuring that all parts of the community can participate in determining the best solution for this. and that there's and digital inclusion is really important because a lot of our participation is now digital, so that has to be addressed. The challenge with this one is it could contradict the law that we have for urban density drives efficiency if these stations require large footprints, especially in dense areas, or what it could do in changing the shape of the city itself. So what do you think of this one?
Yeah, I like this one. I also think this is one of those ones that, even though it was a future cast, we should figure out ways to start doing this today.
Mm-hmm.
We've already figured out ways to get rid of waste effectively, even if we don't in some cases. Landfills are a problem, continue to be. And as you mentioned, waste, especially toxic waste, typically ends up in low income areas. I believe in one of our episodes, we talked about the fact that 3 out of every toxic waste area is in a minority community. And so as much as we recognize all these problems that exist, we're just carrying on with business as usual in addressing the waste and landfill problem. So as much as we can, I'd love to see this one start getting implemented as soon as possible. I really like this one.
Yeah. So Shay, let's move on to the next one. This one's yours.
Yes. And the next one here is rapid transit pods. And they are essentially small automated vehicles running on dedicated tracks or roads for high efficiency personal or shared transit. And if you can imagine little pods with people in them running across a city quickly. And the laws that support this are really unsurprising, related to transportation. The first one being that sustainable transportation improves livability. We talked about the fact that access is a big part of how you include people in the vibrant creation of opportunity in cities, and rapid transit pods could reduce reliance on private vehicles, enhance air quality, because you reduce private vehicles, you reduce the emissions that happen in the city, and makes some maybe formerly inaccessible places accessible for people across the city. And the second law that supports this one is that urban form shapes social interactions. The idea being that carefully integrated transit systems can promote the vibrant mixed-use zoning that Jane Jacobs always pointed to as a way to ensure cities thrive. And these mixed land use requirements would require cooperation from the community, involvement of the community in the determination of the policies that matter, strong regional cooperation so that you can seamlessly integrate these pods into urban and suburban contexts. And so as much as we want to build pods for the cities, it has to cover as much area as possible to make it as optimal as we'd like it to be. The challenge here, if you're listening and you're thinking, it is immediately that the infrastructure costs would probably make it less affordable for some strata of society in our cities. And the law it flouts is the one of affordable housing, ensuring social equity. Would we have to redirect funds from housing projects, for example, to make the transportation system more used for transit pods, and consequently will low-income communities even have access to these pods? So we need to bear those things in mind. The equity concerns exist with this one for sure.
Yeah, I really like this one because of it's a creative way of changing the current state of what we do with transportation infrastructure. I like the points about flexibility and trying to integrate the city better through this type of infrastructure. What I'm curious about, Jay, I'm not sure. We don't seem to be successful in the US, at least, building out large infrastructure projects. And this could still be a challenging infrastructure undertaking. And so I wonder if we could use existing infrastructure, which is our roads, and instead of the current transportation system of buses, maybe we can use vans. And the idea that I have is take a smaller vehicle, electrified, and increase the network and connectivity of what that can do. Because again, with buses and like especially in a city like Austin, you have a limited set of buses on a limited bus network and a very, a single light rail system that's, pretty useless except for a few people. And bring in that flexibility. And the example that I use, that comes to mind is my colleague Anna takes either the bus or the train from Northwest Austin to downtown Austin when she comes into the office. But when she leaves, the bus only leaves once an hour. And if she misses that bus, she's got to wait another hour before it comes. And I think that's very constraining. So she's very dedicated to public transportation, but there are very few people like her that would commit to doing that once an hour thing. And so I think a more frequent, more flexible system could be effective. What do you think, Shay?
Yeah, I like that you always try to find the balance between, in this case, some of these far out ideas, and you bring it back to what will help people today. Austin is spending, I'm proposing to spend a lot of money to build roads. What if we could?
Let's say $4 billion on expanding I-35 from 12 to 22 lanes. What a stupid idea.
Mind-blowing. It's such a mind-blowingly stupid idea. And if we could achieve what I think I hear you saying, this multimodal approach to transportation that addresses the needs of all the strata of society. In the example you gave, something like buses, similar to the pods. In the example of the light rail system, the wild thing is we actually moved to Austin and moved close to the light rail system because we're moving from Chicago, where the transport system is pretty decent. And my wife figured out the first week that this wasn't a Chicago transport system like rail. When she'd get there as the train was going, and she's like, when will the next one show up? She's a planner, so it's an hour, and that would not be a good way to resume at her new job an hour later than she was supposed to. So she would have to drive. So I feel that to agree with you that, yeah, there should be a middle ground between what we currently focus on and what the future should be.
Yeah.
In terms of transportation modes.
Yeah. I really like how you brought that example of, Michelle echoes the example that Anna faces. And I also want to bring up a thing that we've talked about in the past about, if this solution, say a private company comes up, like, you have Uber and you have these little two-wheeled scooters. And, we brought up in the last episode my experience trying out one of those scooters, and it's just not affordable.
It's not.
It would have to be public transportation, public infrastructure that comes up with this solution to make it affordable for all parts of the community for it actually to work.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So let's move on to the next one, Reza. It's yours. Yeah.
So the next one is sustainability domes. This one is, a little out there. So enclosed environments with regulated air, temperature, and energy systems designed for extreme climate resilience. The supporting laws over here is climate resilience is an urban imperative. These domes could be a solution to create microclimates addressing extreme weather or air quality issues. Other supporting law is urban greening enhances resilience. These domes could support controlled ecosystems to improve biodiversity and recreational space for that community. The big community element for this one is to ensure that these domes have public spaces for all parts of society to foster that social cohesion that we often talk about in our episodes, especially with in an urban environment that doesn't have green spaces. Green spaces are super important for us, for our health and well-being of us as humans. The challenge of this one is it could contradict the urban density drives efficiency law, because the domes could require excessive land or very high energy inputs. So what do you think of this one, Shay?
Yeah, this one. So with future casting and strategic foresights, you share what you deduce without your personal biases is ideally the way you should go with it. But with this one, I am not as much of a fan because the possible futures it suggests is one where we've experienced some catastrophe or issue that ends up leaving us with this as the only option. Microclimates under domes. And as you can imagine, it will be exclusionary, which if anyone has even listened to one of the episodes of this podcast, you will know that is not the future state that we desire in our cities. So that was my reaction, but I still thought to share.
Yeah.
Even as it suggests a future state that is suboptimal.
Yeah. I mean, I love that about you, Seyi. I love your creativity and future forecast, your future casting. This is something that made us fast friends right from the start. Just admire your creativity and always inspired by it. And so this one is that, which is sort of throwing this idea out there with no judgment for us to explore because it could lead to other better ideas. This one, I agree with you, not the best one, could be exclusionary. Imagine these domes being worse than gated community. We already have exclusionary gated communities. This would just be even more. And maybe only the rich could afford these domes and others have to live on the outside, which would be a terrible consequence of doing this. So yeah. So with that, Jay, let's hop to the next one.
Yeah, so the next one here is that idea of localized weather control systems. And the definition of this one is these technologies like ionizers or cloud seeding to influence local weather patterns, primarily to reduce heat or increase rainfall in a micro or localized, hyper-localized area. And this one fits and is supported by two laws as well. Climate resilience is an urban imperative, where weather control could reduce urban heat islands or ensure availability of water in locales that there is none. The second one is that urban health is a collective responsibility. The idea being that a better air quality or the cooling effects that localized weather control systems can provide would improve or provide benefits to the health of the people in those communities. And as you can imagine, this one is another one that would require some participatory governance so that we don't flout any ethical or cause conflicts in regions over the effects of the weather. You don't want to control the weather situation in Cedar Park to the detriment of Leander is maybe the idea here. And so the challenge, as I can immediately suggest, and I know our listeners are already thinking, is that this will require some regional cooperation to enhance the sustainability of both the immediate local area, but also the areas around it, because it will be disruptive in neighborhoods. That's just the nature of hyper-localized technologies like this. And the biggest one, I think, is the ethical concerns about just consequences that are unintended. And as you and I say, when you think about systems, unintended consequences are just consequences you fail to think about. So I'd love your thoughts on this one, Reza.
Yeah, this one's very interesting. This echoes one of our top 5 books on cities, A Ministry for the Future, where they do explore localized weather control. And I encourage our listeners to read that book, listen to that episode. It's a great episode, one of our best episodes, really fun to do.
Yeah.
And it does bring up in the book this aspect of regional cooperation as a requirement for this to work. And I believe this is the critical part of addressing this type of technology. I mean, there are experiments that are happening today, and you have people on each side with strong opinions about it. In fact, in the New York Times, I think about a week ago, there was an article about these different research groups sending up balloons, up into the sky to assess and detect whether anyone was doing any of these types of experiments, just as a sort of an early alarm to determine if there were going to be some bad consequences from it. And so you're absolutely right. The regional issues need to be addressed. The ethical considerations need to be addressed as well before. I mean, this is a realistic one. We just don't understand everything about it. And there's promise as well as peril that comes with it.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating one. I read a New York Times article earlier today, actually, that talked about the fact that we've now reached a point where, because we're so worried about unintended consequences, we prevent science from moving forward.
Mm,
And I it challenged me a little bit, because I do find that I've considered myself a technology optimist, but also a realist in that sense. And I believe in science. And I do find myself almost immediately going to, we shouldn't do this because of the ethical issues, when that is probably not the answer. There's a middle ground with some of these. And the way the author framed it is that we claim we want to keep nature as it is, but all our actions as we've advanced technologically have fundamentally changed nature, and we should just be careful but not stop trying to. It goes, we wouldn't have furniture from
yeah.
wood if we didn't cut down trees, for
Yes.
example. So
Yes. That's a great point.
it challenged me a little bit, despite the clear ethical issues that might come from doing this. But that was a thought. Yeah. Next one, Reza.
All right. So next one is vertical urban farms. And the definition of this is high-rise structures that integrate farming technologies like hydroponics and aeroponics to produce food locally. In fact, we talked about this in one of our episodes, The Future of Food, with one of the experts that we brought on, Kelly James. So if you haven't heard that episode, it's a really, really good episode. This is realistic, actually, and that episode really dives into some of the trade-offs. I mean, we're doing this disservice, like all the things that Kelly talked about. But let's talk about it really quickly. What this supports is urban food systems impact sustainability. So that's one of the laws where we talk about these vertical farms could help localize food production that could reduce transportation emissions. That's good for sustainability. And then urban greening enhances resilience. These farms can add vegetation to urban cores, improving biodiversity and the cooling effect in cities. Important community element to this is, and we talked about in that episode, community supported agriculture. This could help with those type of programs, connecting residents to local food systems, bringing food closer to the area rather than, sort of these farms that are far away. The challenges with it are the high energy costs for doing this. So it could really make the law, it could affect the law of urban density drives efficiency, especially if these vertical farms are powered by non-renewable resources. What do you think, Shay?
Yeah, this one, I like that you also are grounded in what was a fantastic episode with Kelly. Absolutely. And the reality is, some of these ideas are already being implemented today. Unfortunately, the examples we have aren't great ones in terms of how feasible these are. A company called Bowery Farming, I believe it's called, raised $700 million and recently shut down, not too long before we recorded this episode. And it was essentially some of the dynamics of urban farming versus just rural farming that Kelly mentioned on the show. Production costs were high, and their spring mix, which was being sold in Whole Foods, was retailing for $16 a pound, when regular spring mix is about $6 a pound. At some point, you will experience low demand, since not everyone can afford $16 per pound spring mix, obviously. And they struggled with distribution beyond these hyperlocal opportunity areas that they were located in, and you can't get the necessary scale to reduce your costs if you don't have distribution. So unfortunately, the example we have is not a great one of a company that's doing this at scale, but it does not, in my opinion, preclude other companies from trying this. We have to figure out a more sustainable and more, I'll use the word, maybe a slightly overused, but organic way of providing food to people,
Yeah.
especially in the US.
I guess this is the challenge. Like maybe this technology hasn't come down enough on the learning and cost curve to
Uh,
become widely acceptable. I don't want to buy a, $16 bag of spring mix unless I'm also buying the $20 smoothie. So it might be a novelty once, but I wouldn't buy it again.
yeah,
So given that, let's go to the next one, Shade. This is the last one that we have, and this one probably is the most out there.
it is. It is. And I know you're a big fan of this one, Reza. I say that sarcastically. And the one we have, the last one here, EV tolls, I believe they're called, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircrafts. And these are electrically powered aircraft for urban mobility, designed for short distance personal or commercial transportation. And the supportive laws here are that urban innovation drives progress, because this does represent the cutting edge transport innovation. And the second law is that sustainable transportation improves livability. The idea being that if these are renewable energy powered, it can reduce carbon footprints. And infrastructure required for takeoff, landing need to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Equitable pricing models are required. And we want to make sure this is inclusive as well. And you can imagine the requirement for building safe takeoff and landing would probably make it less affordable for communities that are probably underserved currently with transportation modes. And consequently, you need to be able to afford housing in those areas, which flouts our law around affordable housing, ensuring social equity. And you might need some sprawl to manage many EV tolls flying all over the place. And consequently, it will cause urban sprawl, flouting urban density driving efficiency law. I'd love to hear your take on this one, Reza.
Yeah, Shay, this one, the first thing that I want to say is that the purpose of doing this type of thinking of the future is to suspend judgment. And with
Yes.
this one, it's a little difficult. I am a bit of a curmudgeon and a little judgmental on some of these. And this one seems to be a rich person's toy more than anything else. That's the first impression that I get with it. I am wondering, can this get to a place where it becomes a broad enough use technology that can serve all parts of the community? This could be like this exciting, like I'm an Iron Man and I'm flying around kind of thing. But as you can imagine, that's not sort of affordable. I also
No.
wonder about like how our cities need to reshape themselves to allow for this form of transportation, where you have roads that are clearly delineated. It's, how do you delineate what roads are in the air? So I'm actually, we've had movies and, artwork and, very creative ideas of what a future city could look like. And it's incredibly appealing to imagine what that world could look like. So there's a lot in this one that could make it challenging, both from how it changes the form of a city as well as whether it's something that can serve a community well.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating one. And I think this actually um, e- encompasses the key takeaways we hope our listeners take from today's episode. We share these ideas, and where we've struggled with them or where we like them is just this need to ensure we're balancing innovation with sustainability, with social equity. And the friction you might hear or the struggle we'll have with some of these is that they tend to lean heavily in one way, in making this less balanced than it needs to be in a city. And if you think about the fact that part of this is also to provide climate resilience and just a more cohesive social structure in our cities, you can immediately point to some of these technologies that don't allow that. Some of them will end up requiring, if they're, for example, rich people's toys, the infrastructure will get built without the participatory governance that is required to ensure all needs across a social strata get addressed. So that is really what we're hoping you take away from this. The technologies are innovative, but what is the balance between implementing them and making sure people get to serve? The theme of our show is sustainable cities and thriving communities, and that's where we're trying to make sure these technologies fall in.
Yeah. That's a great way to sum it up, Seyi. That's the crux of what we try to explore in every episode, and so those takeaways are really good. So let's close out the episode by telling our listeners that we have a mailbag, and we like to bring mailbags up in every episode. And for this week's episode, please send us your mailbag, hello@futureforward.fm, of ideas you think that we have not covered, or opinions you have about the ideas of that we've shared so far, and poke holes in it or extend it, or what have you. We'd love to hear from you. hello@futureforward.fm, and one of you will get the book that we talked about in this episode, which is Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, one of our top 5 books about cities.
Thanks so much, Reza. I really enjoyed this episode. Allowed us to explore possible futures, and we hope our listeners enjoyed it too.
Yeah. So with that, let's close out by saying, please rate and review. That helps other listeners find us. Please like and subscribe. Helps the algorithm show up, have the show up for others that would find this interesting. And most important, please share this with someone that you believe will enjoy it, that you like, that you care about. And until the next episode, thanks for listening to Future Forward. We'll see you next time.